I remember the exact moment Marcus decided I wasn't worth his time anymore. It was a Tuesday morning, unremarkable in every way except for the manila envelope he slid across our breakfast table like it was a business proposal he'd already lost interest in. "Divorce papers," he said, not even looking up from his phone. "My lawyer says this should be quick. You don't have anything anyway." I looked at the envelope, then at him. His hair was freshly cut, expensive. His suit was new, something Italian I didn't recognize. There was a confidence in his posture that hadn't been there 6 months ago, back when he was just another mid-level manager at Davidson and Herzog Financial. "You're serious," I said. He finally looked at me, and that's when he laughed. Not a chuckle, not a nervous deflection. A full, genuine laugh that echoed through our kitchen like I just told the world's most obvious joke. "Of course I'm serious, Claire. Look at yourself. You work part-time at a nonprofit that barely pays you. You drive a 15-year-old sedan. You shop at discount stores." He stood up, straightening his tie. "I'm about to make partner. Jennifer thinks it's time I had a wife who actually reflects my status." Jennifer, his secretary. "Of course. The hearing is in 3 weeks," he continued, gathering his briefcase. "Don't bother fighting it. You can't afford a lawyer anyway, and honestly, what would you even fight for? This house is in my name. The cars are in my name. You have nothing." He left, and the door clicked shut with a finality that should have broken me. But here's what Marcus didn't know, what nobody knew. I wasn't just working part-time at a nonprofit. I was the nonprofit's largest anonymous donor, funneling money through a legal trust structure my late grandmother had taught me to build. The modest office I went to 3 days a week. It was housed in a building I owned through a holding company. The discount stores I shopped at? I was a silent investor in their parent corporation. My grandmother, Eleanor Hastings, had taught me 2 things before she died. Never let anyone know the full extent of your resources, and never marry a man who measures love in dollar signs. I'd failed at the second lesson, but I'd excelled at the first. For 3 weeks, I let Marcus believe his own narrative. He moved Jennifer into our home the day after I moved out to a rental apartment. He posted photos on social media of them at restaurants I'd always suggested, but he'd always deemed too expensive for our budget. He told his colleagues at Davidson and Herzog that he was divorcing dead weight. I knew all of this because Davidson and Herzog Financial wasn't just where Marcus worked. It was a firm I'd invested in 7 years ago, acquiring a controlling but silent stake when they were struggling during a market downturn. I didn't manage it directly. I had people for that. But I received monthly reports and I knew exactly who worked there, what they earned, and what they thought their futures held. The divorce hearing arrived on a cold morning in late October. The courthouse was downtown, gray and imposing in that way government buildings often are. I arrived in my old sedan, wearing a simple navy dress I'd owned for years. Marcus arrived in his new Mercedes, Jennifer on his arm in something that cost more than my monthly rent. He saw me in the hallway outside the courtroom and actually smirked. Jennifer whispered something to him, and they both laughed. "Claire," he said, approaching with the swagger of someone who'd already won. "I'm glad you didn't waste money on a lawyer. This will be over in 20 minutes. You can go back to your little nonprofit, and I can get on with my actual life." "Okay," I said simply. That seemed to surprise him. He'd expected tears, maybe anger. Instead, I just looked at him with the same calm expression I'd worn for 12 years of marriage, through every dismissive comment, every casual cruelty he disguised as honesty. We entered the courtroom. It was smaller than I'd expected, wood-paneled and formal. Judge Catherine Reeves presided, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and an efficient manner. Marcus's lawyer, a man named Thornton who looked like he charged by the syllable, sat with an expensive leather folder and an air of absolute certainty. I sat alone at my table. "Mrs. Ashford," Judge Reeves said, glancing at me over her reading glasses. "I see you're representing yourself today." "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you understand the proceedings?" "I do." Marcus's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward dissolution of marriage. My client and Mrs. Ashford have been married for 12 years. There are no children. All major assets are held in my client's name. We're asking for a simple, clean division that reflects the reality of their financial situations." "And what is that reality, Mr. Thornton?" Judge Reeves asked. Thornton smiled like he was explaining something to a child. "My client is a soon-to-be partner at Davidson and Herzog Financial, one of the city's premier investment firms. He earns a substantial salary and has excellent prospects. Mrs. Ashford works part-time at a small nonprofit and has no significant income or assets to declare. We believe a minimal settlement is appropriate." Judge Reeves turned to me. Mrs. Ashford, do you have any response to this characterization? I have some documents I'd like to submit, Your Honor. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Not leather, not expensive. Just a plain manila folder that I'd assembled with my actual lawyer 3 days earlier. I walked it up to the bench. Marcus looked annoyed. Your Honor, we don't have time for... Mr. Ashford, Judge Reeves said sharply. You'll have your turn. She opened the folder. Her expression didn't change, but I saw her eyes move across the first page, then the second, then flip to the third. She looked at me, then back at the documents, then at me again. Mrs. Ashford, she said slowly, these documents indicate that you are the primary beneficiary of the Hastings Family Trust. Yes, Your Honor, and that this trust holds substantial assets. Approximately $470 million, Your Honor. As of last quarter, the courtroom went silent. Not the kind of silence where people are waiting for the next word. The kind where oxygen seems to have been sucked out of the room. Before we dive deeper into what happened next, if you're enjoying this story of quiet revenge and hidden power, please hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Trust me, you'll want to see how this plays out. Marcus's face went white, then red, then white again. Furthermore, I continued, my voice steady, the trust holds controlling interest in several companies and properties, including a 63% stake in Davidson and Herzog Financial. Thornton stood so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. Your Honor, we weren't informed. That's because I chose not to disclose it during the marriage, I said calmly, which was my legal right, as the trust was established before our marriage and kept separate from all marital finances. My grandmother was very careful about that when she designed the structure. Judge Reeves looked at Marcus. Mr. Ashford, did you know about your wife's financial position? Marcus couldn't speak. His mouth opened and closed like he was drowning. No, Your Honor, Thornton answered for him. My client had no knowledge of these assets. Because you never asked, I said, looking directly at Marcus for the first time. In 12 years, you never once asked about my family, my background, or what I did before we met. You assumed that because I didn't dress like your colleagues' wives or drive a new car every year, I had nothing. You measured my worth by your standards, and you found me lacking. Your Honor, Thornton tried again, but Judge Reeves raised her hand. I'm going to take a 30-minute recess to review these documents, she said. When we return, we're going to discuss what a fair division of assets actually looks like. As people filed out, Marcus grabbed my arm in the hallway. Jennifer had disappeared, probably to the bathroom to process what she'd just heard. You lied to me, he hissed. I never lied, I said, pulling my arm free. I just never corrected your assumptions. There's a difference. This is insane. You lived like we were barely middle class. I lived within my values, I said. I didn't need to prove my worth with expensive things. I thought you understood that. I thought you loved me for who I was, not what I could buy. $400 million, Claire. You let me patronize you for years when you could have... Could have what? Made you feel small? Emasculated you? I shook my head. I wanted a partner, Marcus. Someone who saw me as an equal regardless of money. Instead, I got someone who saw me as inferior because of it. The money didn't change who I was. It just revealed who you were. When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Reeves had a different energy. She looked at Marcus with something approaching disdain. Mr. Ashford, she said, your petition for divorce will be granted. However, given the substantial assets held by Mrs. Ashford and the fact that she maintained separate finances throughout your marriage, I see no grounds for you to claim any portion of her trust or its holdings. Your Honor, Thornton said desperately, my client has built a life with certain expectations. Expectations he built on false assumptions, Judge Reeves interrupted. Mrs. Ashford maintained completely separate finances. She owned nothing jointly with your client. In fact, looking at these documents, it appears your client has been living in a home that Mrs. Ashford purchased through a holding company 3 years ago. Marcus's face went gray. What? The house on Maple Ridge Drive, I said. I bought it when the previous owner foreclosed. You were so excited when your friend at the bank got us such a good deal on the rental. That friend worked for a property management company I own. We never rented, Marcus. I let you think we did. Additionally, Judge Reeves continued, looking at a specific page, it appears Mr. Ashford's employer, Davidson and Herzog Financial, is majority controlled by Mrs. Ashford's trust. She looked at Marcus over her glasses. Did you know your wife essentially owns the company you work for? Marcus couldn't answer. Jennifer, who had returned and was sitting in the back row, Looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Your Honor, I said. I don't want anything from Marcus. No alimony. No division of his personal assets. Nothing. I just want the divorce finalized so we can both move forward. Judge Reeves nodded slowly. Very well. The marriage is dissolved. Mr. Ashford keeps his personal assets, which amount to approximately. She glanced at his financial disclosure, $200,000 in savings and investments. Mrs. Ashford retains all trust assets and holdings. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. In the hallway afterward, Marcus stood frozen while his lawyer packed up his briefcase with shaking hands. Jennifer approached cautiously. Marcus, she said softly. Maybe we should. Leave me alone, he said, his voice hollow. I walked past them toward the exit. I didn't look back, but I heard Marcus call out, Claire, wait. I stopped but didn't turn around. Why didn't you tell me, he asked. All those years. Why didn't you just tell me? I thought about it, really thought about it. Then I turned to face him one last time. Because I wanted you to love me when you thought I was nobody, I said. I wanted to know that who I was mattered more than what I had. But you couldn't even manage that. You couldn't love me when you thought I was ordinary. So how could you have possibly loved me if you knew the truth? His eyes were red. Whether from anger or tears I couldn't tell. The partnership at Davidson and Herzog, he said quietly. Am I going to lose it? I don't run the day-to-day operations, Marcus. I have people for that. But I did call the managing director this morning. I told him about the divorce, about Jennifer, about how you've been describing me to your colleagues for the past 3 weeks. His face drained of color again. What did you tell them? The truth, I said simply. That we're getting divorced, and that I'd appreciate it if they handled certain personnel matters with appropriate discretion. What they do with that information is up to them. I didn't wait for his response. I walked out of the courthouse into the cold October air, got into my 15-year-old sedan, and drove to my little rental apartment. Please smash that like button, and make sure you're subscribed because we share stories like this every week. Tales of underdogs, hidden power, and perfect timing. Now, let's get back to Marcus's face when he realized what just happened. 3 days later, Marcus's name was quietly removed from the partnership track at Davidson and Herzog. He was reassigned to a different department, one with less client contact and significantly fewer advancement opportunities. Jennifer was let go entirely, with HR citing policy violations regarding workplace relationships. I heard all of this not from any vengeful monitoring, but from the monthly report I received as the majority stakeholder. I didn't ask for any of it. I just let the company handle it the way they'd handle any situation involving an employee who showed poor judgment and unprofessional conduct. The truth is, I didn't need to destroy Marcus. He destroyed himself the moment he measured my worth by my wardrobe and my car. He'd lost everything that mattered the moment he chose status over substance. A month after the divorce was finalized, I received a letter from him. Not an email, an actual letter, handwritten on expensive stationery that he probably bought specifically for this. Claire, I've had time to think about everything, and I realize now how badly I misunderstood our entire relationship. You were right. I couldn't love you when I thought you were ordinary because I couldn't see that ordinary was never what you were. You were extraordinary in ways that had nothing to do with money, and I was too blind to see it. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even deserve a response to this letter. I just wanted you to know that losing you taught me something I should have learned years ago. The most valuable things in life are the ones you can't put a price tag on. I hope you find someone who deserves you. Marcus. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. Not because I wanted to keep it as some trophy, but because it represented something important, proof that people can grow, even when that growth comes too late to matter. I never responded. Some lessons need to be learned in silence. 6 months later, I met Thomas at a charity gala for the nonprofit I still worked at part-time. He was a high school teacher, wore a suit he'd clearly borrowed for the occasion, and had no idea who I was beyond the nice woman who asked about his students. On our third date, when things were getting serious, I told him everything. About the trust, the holdings, the net worth that made headlines when business reporters occasionally wrote profiles on anonymous philanthropists. He listened carefully, then said, "That's really cool. Does this mean you can help me set up a better funding structure for our after-school program?" I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. "Yeah," I said. "I think I can help with that." We got married 2 years later, in a small ceremony at the Botanical Gardens. I wore a dress that cost $200. He wore the same borrowed suit from the gala, properly tailored this time as my wedding gift to him. We honeymooned at a state park, hiking and cooking over a campfire. I never told him not to share my financial situation with others, but he never did. Not because I asked him to keep it secret, but because it never seemed relevant to who we were or what we were building together. That's the thing about real love, I learned. It doesn't need a net worth statement to validate itself. Sometimes I think about that morning when Marcus slid the divorce papers across the table, laughing like I was the punchline to a joke only he understood. I think about how certain he was, how completely convinced that his version of reality was the only one that mattered. And then I think about Judge Reeves opening that manila folder, her expression carefully neutral as she processed information that turned Marcus's entire worldview inside out. People often ask me, in the rare interviews I give for business publications, what advice I'd give to young women entering finance or building wealth. I always say the same thing. Never let someone else define your value. And never trust someone who only respects you once they know your net worth. The people worth keeping in your life are the ones who see your worth when you're wearing discount jeans and driving an old car. Because that's when they're seeing you, not your bank account. Marcus taught me that lesson the hard way. But some lessons, no matter how painful, are worth learning. The most dangerous person in any room isn't the one making the most noise or wearing the most expensive suit. It's the one everyone underestimates, the one who stays quiet and observant while others assume they know the whole story. Marcus learned that truth in a courtroom, in front of a judge, his lawyer, and the woman he'd replaced me with. I learned it much earlier, from a grandmother who wore department store dresses and drove a sedan until the day she died, all while quietly building an empire that would outlast her by generations. Power doesn't announce itself with designer labels and luxury cars. Real power is the trust fund nobody knows about, the controlling stake in the company where your critics work, the deed to the house your ex-husband thought he was so clever to rent. Real power is having every advantage and choosing, day after day, to live like you don't. Because when the moment comes, when the truth finally emerges in a courtroom or a boardroom, or wherever fate decides to reveal it, the look on their faces is worth more than anything money could buy. Marcus laughed at me when he filed for divorce, but in the end, the joke was on him, and I didn't have to tell it. I just had to wait for the punchline to land. If this story of patience and perfect revenge resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories of people who stayed quiet until the perfect moment. Your support helps us bring you these stories every week. And if you know someone who's ever been underestimated or dismissed, share this story with them. Sometimes people need to be reminded that the quietest person in the room might just be the most powerful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.